Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Kingdom Podcast. I've got a very dear friend of mine here with me today, John Redenbo, and we're going to talk about some things today, or a subject today that all of you have probably had happen in your life. I'd probably say 100% of people have had this happen, John. We're going to talk about dreams. We're going to talk about the importance of dreams. We're actually going to talk about a dream that I had about a year ago, wasn't it? Maybe it was a little bit, about a year ago, I think.
January 1st of 23.
January 1st of 23. And many of you that have watched us and followed us, you know that I do dream a lot. And we share those dreams a lot in different formats and different places that they get talked about. These are prophetic dreams. These are not just dreams that you dream. Matter of fact, we believe all dreams is God speaking to you. And it's just whether you're listening or know how to listen that makes the difference. There was a dream that I had back in January of 2023 that I think is a very significant dream for our nation and for the world for that fact. But the reason John's on here talking with me today about a dream that I had is because John interprets dreams. John has a gift for this. We call it spiritual intelligence. I think you probably coined that phrase, even though you're the only person I ever heard that uses that phrase. But John is able to do that as a prophetic gift from God and some other factors that he uses. We probably won't get deep today in how he does that. I'll get you to do a brief introduction of how you do that, John, and then we need to get into this dream, man. Yeah. So, John, welcome to the Kingdom Podcast.
It's great to be here, Greg. Thanks for having me on.
Yes, sir. So let's talk about this dream. It's called the Five Giants Dream. And I don't know if we called it that or you called it that.
That's what the title was when you sent it to me.
Dutch may have called it that then.
Yeah. And the reason I know that is because I was working on a dream called the Five Giants Dream.
Wow.
And then you said, hey, I want you to take a look at this dream. And you sent it to me, and I opened it up, and it said the Five Giants Dream. And I'm like, am I being punked? Or is this the same as the other? I'm like, no, the other one was like 2 sentences long, and yours is 5 pages long. And I'm like, what are the odds?
Yeah.
While I'm working on a Five Giants Dream, somebody would send me another dream completely different called the Five Giants Dream.
That's the beautiful thing about the prophetic is that God confirms and takes people that are in totally different streams and walks of life, and he can speak the same thing and cause them to merge somewhere down the road to bring a confirmation of what he's saying. It just excites me when I hear other people having dreams that I had. Because it lets me know, hey, you're dreaming the same things. God's speaking the same things and bringing confirmation. So we used a term a while ago, John, about spiritual intelligence. Take a couple of minutes and tell us, what do we mean when we use those words, spiritual intelligence? Well,
it goes back about 6 or 7 years when I was having a conversation with a friend of mine. We were both working on movie projects in Hollywood, and We just said, you know, she had a gift for word of knowledge, I had a gift for dreams, and we just said on the phone one day, I'm like, do we really believe this stuff? Like, if not, that's fine, but I'm not going to waste a lot of time. But if we really believe that, like, this is information from God in heaven,
yep,
then this is the best intelligence on the planet. And if that's the case, why isn't there a full-time intelligence agency advising the President of the United States? Now, Greg, you and I both have friends that have got pastors or prophets that would fly out there, you know, and advise the president or have a photo op or a prayer session or something. But I'm talking about every morning on the president's desk, man, the CIA puts the president's daily brief. And it's a summation of all of the 17 known intelligence agencies and all of their information condensed down into what the president needs to know that day. And so if we're getting prophecies and dreams and visions and we can track them all. We started looking at like 65, the top known prophets and dreamers, and that's who I knew who you were before I even knew you lived in Franklin. Because I heard about this dreamer guy because through Dutch, you know, we pay attention to give him 15, and then I'm like, who's this Greg Hood guy? And somebody said, oh, he lives here in Franklin. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me. And so I came to your church and we met, and then the next time you texted me the Five Giants Dream.
Yeah.
I had just met you once at the church that time. And you sent it over, and then we got together and smoked cigars and had a great conversation and kind of went from there. But spiritual intelligence, we see it as using spiritual sources, raw data, which would be like dreams, visions, and we call it righteous spiritual sources. We're not talking seances. And
That's right. That's right.
We're talking sources from God to to combine them together, centralize that information, analyze them, and then deliver what we call actionable intelligence, times, dates, locations, to a leader so they can act.
This is, I want to say this is Dream Interpretation 101 on steroids. I've got friends and ministry acquaintances that have written books on dreams and dream interpretation. Some of those books, not all, some of those books fall very short of being able to give the body of Christ, let me say it, an intelligent way and a real spiritual way of hearing what God said. And you've got dream dictionaries. You've got all those types of things that are out there. Well, this word, it means this. Well, I beg to differ with that, because I don't think that car means car every time in the dream. Or, somebody's riding on the ocean, water skiing backwards on their hands. That doesn't mean the same thing every time. If that's even one, I like making stuff up like that. But I think dictionaries are I won't say they're dangerous, but they pigeonhole us into certain areas of interpreting to where we could actually miss what God is saying.
Right. In
this 5 giants dream, John, this is a very detailed dream. I don't know how I do it. Dutch has asked me, and we say Dutch, for those of you listening, Dutch Sheets is a dear friend of mine that I give a lot of these dreams to, and he uses them on Give Him 15, he says, how do you remember this? And Tim, his brother, and I were talking about this past weekend in a conference we were together, because Tim does the same thing. Get up, it's vivid, it's detailed, you can remember every facet of it. And it's kind of like, it's not a dream, but it's a dream. But sometimes it feels like you're in it for real. I mean, it's that vivid. And Tim, like myself, said to me, once we write it out, it fades away. So I think it's a supernatural remembering, a recollecting of what goes on in those dreams. I don't know if they're technically could be called a night vision, or if something else happens and you're taking into another dimension in that. But right now, the language we have, and even the interpreting of these things we have, is dreams. And whatever level that's on, I don't know. It's beyond me at the moment. But whenever I gave you that dream, you called me and you said you felt like this dream was important for the nation and for the world. So I want to give you a little liberty today to give us the dream and some bullet points about the dream that you think is important. I think one of those things is manifesting right now in the Middle East. I think we're in it. I had the dream early part of last year, and I think it started now. That the first giant that we confronted is now. And so, John, just take some time, and wherever you feel like we need to start in the dream. Matter of fact, people, you can get the dream at greghood.org. You can go there and look under dreams and visions, prophetic words, and you can download the manuscript of that, or the PDF of that, if you will. So where do we need to start in understanding this dream?
Well, I think a lot of times people don't have any idea, like, the depth that's in dreams like this. And just because it's 5 pages long doesn't mean that there isn't so much depth in every page. Like, I think you gave it to me September 5th. So we're over 6 months that my entire team has had this dream. And when I say a team, we mean dozens of people working on every symbol and every facet of every scene in the dream. And just to give you an overall view of the dream, there's the setup, which is the setting. It's like the introduction. And then there's 5 distinct separate battles with 5 distinct enemies. And so the opening introduction starts in Philadelphia, Old Town City of Philadelphia. And it's you and Dutch and some others that are walking to a boxing gym. And you're walking down a side street, and you see a side door with stairs going up, and the door is open, and you walk up into like a closed door at the top, and right at the top of the door, as you're about to enter into what we know to be a boxing gym, as it's described, Gabriel meets you there and says, there's no more training, there's no more practice, you're going straight into the champion fight. And you're like, wow, like we didn't know we were fighting today, you guys are ready to work out. You get in there, and all of a sudden, it's like the next scene, you're like immediately transported to this battlefield. And the battlefield, in the dream, it's described as being shaped like the United States of America. And there's a large plateau overlooking this battlefield. And we see throughout the context of the dream that the battlefield is trimmed in old growth pine trees. And to me, that sounded really like uniquely specific. And so sometimes God will just hit on a symbol and say, look that up. And I'm like, okay, well, I don't even know how to look up a battlefield like that. Come to find out, there's a database of battlefields.
Wow, that's amazing.
So I searched large plateau overlooking battlefields shaped like the United States. And boom, here comes up the Battle of Brandywine. I never heard of Brandywine.
Never heard of it either. I'm a historian.
Yeah.
I should have heard of it.
You should have.
Mine's more Civil War era.
So I'm looking at, like, I've never heard of Brandywine. What is it? I look up Brandywine. It was the largest battle in the Revolutionary War. George Washington fought in this battle. And I'm like, I wonder where this happened at. 30 minutes outside of Philadelphia. So it's interesting that the dream starts in Philly and they're 30 minutes away. And then I look into the Battle of Brandywine, and it was 11,000 men fought for 11 hours on 9/11, 1777.
Wow.
And I'm like,
how do you can't make that stuff up.
Make that up. Like, there's no way. If I would have thought, what would be the most significant national date for us to go through one of the biggest defeats of the Revolutionary War? Pick a day. What would it be? Christmas Day, Valentine? You'd be like, President's Day, September 11th. Like, are you
9/11, 1777.
1777. And so we're like, whoa, like we're on to something. I don't know what this is, but then I started pulling back and looking at the broader history of what was going on in the Philadelphia campaign. So we lose that battle, and they push our armies back. And 2 weeks later, the British take over our capital, which is the city of Philadelphia. And so in the lowest point of the Revolutionary War, George Washington takes his troops up, which is really a suburb of Philly now, just outside of Philly, to a place called Valley Forge. And he has like the roughest winter on record in the Revolutionary War, where men are dying and their feet are exposed and they don't have shoes and there's a plague. And all of this, they're dying of exposure, and it's just absolutely horrible. It's in the middle of that winter in 1777 that George Washington has his famous 3 visions.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Give us a quick overview of who the giants were, what the giants were, and then let's back up to the first one and look let's go a little deeper into the first giant, and also who was fighting the giant in the dream. I guess it's fine. This person has given me permission to use their names from time to time, so I think that it's okay to call their names if we needed to do that.
Sure. Okay. As long as we're not putting a target on it.
That's right. That's right. I think we're good.
So there's 5 distinct giants in 5 distinct battles. You are up. You're like Overwatch. So you're on the plateau. Dutch is there. There's a couple other people that we find out when he sends them out to battle. But there's a group of if you add everybody up in the way that it's worded, like you said, I'm one of his seconds, but I'm a main second. So there's multiple seconds, which means there's at least 2 others, and then you're a main one, so there's probably 1 or 2 beyond that. And then you look at the company that's
and this is all boxing language.
Yeah. And you look at the company of people that's talked about, I think there's 7 or 9 people mentioned. And you said, a few of us had fought together. So there's at least 12 people, and it may be upwards of 20, and it could be hundreds. But I'm like, well, how many people are on the plateau? Like, we really dig in to answer these questions. We got to go through every battle scene. Oh, well, this guy fought with this guy, and there were 2 other guys, and then this person, that person. And so we're adding all these up. So it's interesting, though, that you're in a unique position that we often see Daniel in, when it says come up higher and then look and see. Because Dutch looks to you and says, Hood, what do you see? And so you're overlooking this you're on this plateau overlooking this battlefield, and that's what happens. Dutch turns to you and he goes, Hood, what do you see? And you see this figure moving towards the center of the battlefield, and you described it as a giant man in a turban and in a full white gown, dress, whatever you call the traditional Arab, like a sheik would wear, like a white robe type thing. And it's got a gold medallion that says 5330. And it's carrying, or it has a leash, and on the leash is a large cheetah with dark colored spots, which I'd never heard of before. What the heck is that? A large cheetah with dark colored spots. I looked it up. Is there such an animal? It's called an Asiatic cheetah. There's only 12 left in the world. They all live in the country of Iran. It's the national animal of the country of Iran. We're like, wow, okay, well, God's clearly speaking about Iran right now. Now, this was in September. You gave it to me in September, and we began to have discussions on who these giants could be.
Right.
This was long before the October 7th day,
right,
when Hamas invades Israel, backed by Iran, and certainly before Iran directly invading Israel. So this was all pretext, just so people are aware of the conversation. And he had, I think the cheetah had gold armor on, and it had a number on the armor that said 2919. So all of these are clues. Like, what the heck is 2919? I don't know. What is 5330? We have no idea. Well, we came to look up. We felt that 5330 was a lexicon number. So we looked it up in both the Greek and the Hebrew. And I believe in the Hebrew it means Pharisee. And in the Greek it means chief. So we're like, okay, whatever this giant man is, it's the chief Pharisee. So it's like, well, that's interesting. And so we're like, well, could it be this person? Could it be the head of Iran? Could it be this person or that person? Or could it be the Muslim Brotherhood, or could it be Hamas, or anything like that? And it just wasn't landing. Like, we're just like, when you get a revelation from God on an interpretation in the word of knowledge, like, it just hits. And you can share it. Like, I shared some things with you, and you're like, that's it. And you're like, and I'm just like, man, I don't know what this is. And we were in your backyard, sitting by the fire, smoking cigars one night, and I'm like, man, we think it could be this, or we think it could be that. And I paused, and I'm like, and you're like, what? And I said, I just got a feeling that doesn't really make sense. You said, what is it? And I said, I feel like this giant is the Prince of Persia. You remember that moment?
Yep.
That was like a breakthrough moment. Now, again, this was in the end of September, before anything happened in the Middle East. And then you and I and Joanne go to the Proceed conference together.
Yep.
And you're driving the truck, and I'm in the car with you. And the whole time, we're talking about this five giants dream. And I'm like, well, if this is the Prince of Persia, then that means this. But the Prince of Persia acting through the country of Iran as a surrogate. And then there's an eagle in a cage, which we believe, of course, the eagle is part of the United States or represents the United States. And he is a captive eagle in a cage that has had all of its feathers plucked, and he pulls it out and throws it. The giant does, and throws it in the middle of the battlefield. So before the warriors ever take the battlefield, this giant takes the battlefield with the cheetah, and with this cage being carried and led by demons, with this kind of dilapidated large eagle that's been deplucked, like completely...
Feathers gone.
Feathers gone. No protection, open borders, whatever you want to say. And when he pulls it out and throws it in the center of the battlefield, it's like dazed and confused. And then he goes... Now, still, none of our warriors of the Ecclesia side have taken the battlefield yet, but he releases the cheetah to go kill the eagle.
Which could represent, and we feel it does, Iran against the United States or its interest.
Right, exactly. And so it was interesting because at that conference was October 6th and 7th.
Right, when all of that happened.
Exactly. So we're at the conference. I'd shared a lot of this with you. You shared some of this with Dutch and Tim. They were talking about the Prince of Persia, which is, until all of this happened, it was an unusual topic to be talking about at a conference.
Never heard anybody really talk about it.
Right? And they're talking about the references in Daniel and the Prince of Persia, from the pulpit, from the stage. And then this was Friday night, and then the next day is October 7th. Hamas invades Israel. And we're like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
The giant with the cheetah just took the battlefield.
Yeah. And he's back on the battlefield.
Back on the battlefield.
Yeah, which is a whole nother story. We don't have time to get into all the details of that. But the cheetah represents Iran. The giant that had it on a leash represents the prince of that region. The eagle in that dream represents the United States. I found it very interesting that you how you described and interpreted the condition of the eagle.
Yes.
Just talk about that.
5 scenes. In 4 of the scenes, there's a caged eagle. And it's different every time. It's a large eagle in a cage. The first time it has its feathers taken out. And so we call that stripped. The second giant comes out, and there's an eagle in a cage, and it has its talons completely broken off. So we call that broken. The third one comes out, and it has the eagle's fine, except it has tape over its face, and we call it blind because it can't see. And then the last one, it has a small incision, and we know that its heart has been taken out and put in this mechanical bear that's the pet of the 4th giant. And so we're looking at this, and we're like, well, if this is the United States, they rescued the United States in the first dream because the cheetah ends up dead, the giant ends up decapitated, and we take the eagle back up to the plateau. So then we think, okay, well, America's safe. And so we're like, well, how come the next giant then has a large eagle? And then what we feel like it represents is 4 stages of the journey of America in this season, and it's stripped, broken, blind, and heartless. And it's like a progression of where we're going or where we're at in different spots.
Is there, in the natural, and I'm asking questions you and I have already answered, but for the sake of the audience today, when an eagle loses its feathers, you were talking to me one time about that process and what it meant when it went through that, the insight of that. Well, give us just a little bit more on that.
I think it's called demolting is what it's called. And eagles can live up to about 40, 45 years. But at the end of 40 or 45 years, their claws are kind of twisted and their beaks are a little bit, they continue to grow just like nails do for us. And if they continue in that path and do nothing, they'll die at 40, 45, maybe 50 years. But at that point, if they go up on a high ledge on a rock by themselves and they take their beak and they pluck out all of their feathers and they smash their claws against the rock and completely break their claws and smash their beak and completely break off their beak. And then other eagles have to come and feed them because they can't hunt, they can't do anything during that time. And they're literally in the cleft of the rock. And what happens is everything regrows and it will literally double their life.
Wow.
Which I think is interesting because I was involved in putting together a presentation for a group that was called the Great Awakening Project, and we looked at the rise and fall of nations. And the average life of an empire in all of history is about 222 years. At the outside, maybe 250 years. But every single empire in the history of the world has failed after that and never recovered. And that's where we are as the United States
age-wise.
Right now.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And I think God's saying to us through this process that if America can do the right things, we can double our lifespan. We can keep living. And I think that's part of George Washington's vision as well, that these 3 perils that came, the third one was the worst, the nations coming in against us, but the Union survived.
Right.
And I think we need to grab a hold of the hope that's with that. And from that vision and from this dream is that America is getting another chance if we can do to ourselves what needs to be done to double that lifespan. Now, whether we call his name or not, that's irrelevant. But the guy that fought this giant and this cheetah and killed it. What does he represent? And you can give his background without giving his name if you don't feel comfortable doing that, even though he's given us permission to do that. Tell us a little bit about what he was doing and all that in the dream.
What's super interesting is I didn't know who this guy was. He's a friend of yours.
Yeah.
And I'm like, man, I've never heard of this guy, so I had to look him up. And I look him up, and he's a pastor of a sizable church. And I'm like, man, what's his background? And apparently he has a background and has written books about Islam. And I'm like, wow, it's really interesting that he would be fighting Prince of Persia. What's also interesting is as I look him up, the first video I come across, I'm just like, pastors that have been out there for a while, hundreds of videos, and I'm like, how do I get a background? And I can read his bio on his website, but that doesn't really tell me much. And I see a video, and I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to watch this video. And I'm scrolling through it at like two times speed, and he begins to talk about an eagle. And he talks about a featherless eagle. And I'm like, you have got to be kidding me. This is the first video I see about this guy. And he's talking about a featherless eagle.
Wow.
The eagle in his section of the dream. And I'm like, man, this guy
blows me away.
Yeah, this is where you feel like you're in the Twilight Zone. You're up in the morning working on this stuff, and you're like, I got to call somebody and tell them, like, this is crazy. But yeah, it's just incredible.
Now, he's written books on Islam, not just about the religion of Islam, but about the dangers of Islam and those types of things as well. And it was him that went after this this cheetah and this giant. Now, are there anything significant about how he did it, or him going out into battle? I know Dutch put gloves on his hands. Any insight on that piece of it?
Yeah, it's really interesting because when Dutch puts gloves on his hands, they're boxing gloves, so they're like a whole boxing glove. But when they're finally put on his hand, they each have fingers like cut out, like a regular work glove or something that you would have, or a leather glove. And so they're put on as a boxing glove, but then they have fingers in them. And the best way to describe it is the difference between a boxing glove and an MMA glove, which is really interesting because as Gabriel talks, and this is still at the very beginning in the battle scene, he begins to talk to Dutch and he says there's a championship bout and you're going to go in, and he says it's going to be 5 rounds. Well, boxing championships aren't 5 rounds.
That's right.
Be 15.
15.
They're 12 now.
Yeah.
But MMA championship fights are 5 rounds.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah. And so I'm like, well, that's interesting. So what's the difference between mixed martial arts? And what's also interesting is the weaponry. And we're looking again at every single symbol in this dream. Each person, each warrior that goes out is given a crown, a bow and arrow, and a battle axe strapped to their back. And we're like, okay, well, if you look in the word, you know what the sword is. What's the battle axe?
Yeah.
Which has led me on a whole entire journey of looking up decapitations in the Bible and like really wanting to understand what is God talking about, because Gabriel looks at Dutch and says, you can't just kill this beast, you have to cut off his head.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what the heck does that mean? You know, does that separate from this or that? And then it gets into a broader conversation on like Psalm 82, seed war.
Yeah.
We could talk for the next 3 hours on that.
Have you discovered, or what have you discovered about the battle axe?
So the battle axe is fascinating. First thing is I started looking into decapitations. I'm like, okay, God, what are you saying here? And then, of course, the most famous one is David and Goliath, right?
Yeah.
The Battle of David and Goliath. He takes his own sword, cuts off his head, holds up his head. There's been artist renderings of that being done. But then I come across Saul. When Saul dies in the battlefield and his armor bearer, hey, run me through and blah, blah, blah. And they come across Saul's body, and the first thing they do is cut off Saul's head. And then they hang it on like the wall of the city, of their city, the Philistines do. And I realized that, see, in my mind, I'm like, oh, so if you're cutting off the head of a giant, that means you're going to kill it for sure.
Yeah.
But that's an Americanized, too many werewolf movies, kind of like, you got to cut off its head to make sure it's dead. That's not how it works in Scripture. In Scripture, they took it specifically as a trophy. And I'm like, whoa, this is going to be a trophy, which means it's a whole precedent-setting, war-shifting statement that God is making, like when David killed Goliath.
And it's a statement to the other nations when you've got the king of one nation's head hanging on your wall.
Yes, it is.
Wow. So that battle axe was for that decapitation.
Right.
Now, whenever the gentleman in this particular battle gets back to the plateau in the dream, he takes off the gloves, and they, I think, become, again, if I remember correctly, boxing gloves, and they're given back to Dutch. And there's a cleaning process that takes place, if I remember correctly, concerning the gloves. And then the second one comes. I want us to kind of pause right here for a moment and just let the folks know that we will come back in another podcast and we'll talk about this second giant. Maybe we can get to 3, 4, and 5 somewhere down the road. But I think this first one is very important with what's going on in the Middle East with Iran and all of the proxies that it uses to come and try to destroy Israel. And so I want to encourage people to go to greghood.org and also look up under the tab of dreams. You can find this dream. You can read it in its entirety. Don't read it as something that's entertainment. Use it as prayer points to be able to pray into what God's doing in the nation. We're in the largest battle our nation has ever been in. And we're fighting against some very large giants that are led by princes of nations. And so when we're talking about things like the Prince of Persia, this is a demonic entity that was set to rule over that region and over that nation as we know it. And we'll get into some teaching on that in the future sometime. We just don't have time to do it in a short podcast like we do today, but we will be back in part 2 very, very soon, and we'll talk about those, all right? So go to greghood.org, sign up for our mailing list. You can look John up on social media. Your website, John, is what?
DreamLifeDecoded.com.
DreamLifeDecoded.com. Go check John out there as well and get to know him, and you can watch him on many outlets to interpret dreams for people. You might have a dream you could bring on there one day because you go on live and you just say, bring your dream, and we'll do our best to interpret it for you. So if you got dreams, check John out. It'll be a phenomenal thing to be able to connect with him on his podcast and what he's doing there in the social media outlets. Share this with people. Find us on all of the outlets that social media is broadcasting or is allowing this broadcast to be on. You'll see those here at the end. Also, check out Kingdom University. We're going to be starting a School of Supernatural Intelligence sometime in the near future with John being the dean of it. We don't have a date set yet, but it's coming. We're talking about that, and hopefully we can get it to you soon so you can learn about supernatural intelligence in a greater way. All right, family, God bless you. We'll see you next time. John, my friend, thank you for being on with us today.
Always a pleasure, Greg.